Okay, so in terms of today's agenda, the first thing I want to discuss is the new UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So that's the living agreement and document which the EU and the UK have agreed in 2020. That agreement has changed the trading relationship with the UK, and then we're going to look at the impacts to Kerry businesses, what are the risks and challenges, and possibly some opportunities as well that have come up because of that agreement. We'll also look in terms of continuing to trade with GB. So if you're buying from GB, selling to GB, or trading to GB, what does that look like? What do you need to do? What information you need? There's a range of resources, useful links, contact numbers, and support from the local enterprise office that we'll summarize there towards the end. And that'll conclude my presentation before we go on to the Q&A. So at that stage, you can ask any specific questions to myself or my colleague, Katrin. We'll address any broad kind of questions that we can at that stage. If the questions get quite specific, we'll take those offline and we can go back to you on a one-to-one basis if it's quite detailed in terms of a company issue. So the first thing, I suppose, the trade agreement was agreed on a basis of the future trading relationship. That agreement was put in place in 2020. It was announced on Christmas Eve. It has been live from the 1st of January. And I say the future trading relationship because you can expect this trading relationship to evolve. There has been a few updates and changes to the agreement already, particularly around Northern Ireland. And that's the one thing to bear in mind. The new relationship that we have, what we're living with now, is going to evolve over the years ahead. So just be conscious of that as you make any buying or selling decisions to the UK. The agreement itself was concluded in record time. So it was concluded in 2020, albeit under a COVID backdrop where negotiations were difficult. There's 1 trillion in trade between the EU and the UK, and this agreement was completed in about 10 months. Just as a comparison, the agreement with Canada and the EU took 7 years to conclude, and you're talking about 20 to 25% of that level of trade. So there's a huge level of complexity in the agreement. It's 1,200 pages. It's not very comprehensive, and that's the issue. There's lots of nuances. There's lots of easements. There's lots of clauses in there. It's a very confusing document. It refers to many other documents, and and that confusion and that challenging is not easy for businesses, and small business in particular, to understand what that agreement does in terms of the future trading relationship. Unfortunately, there was no implementation or phasing period. Typically, when you have a trading agreement of this scale and size, you'd have 6 to 9 months to prepare for it. And that's both for companies and regulators. So regulators, as in HMRC, Customs, Department of Agriculture, all the industry bodies that need to regulate the movement of goods and services and control and govern the agreement, had no time to implement it either, because it was announced on Christmas Eve to go live on the 1st of January. So that was a challenge. And obviously in the first couple of weeks, we have had a number of issues already, as I'll discuss shortly. And that, as I said, leads me into the next slide. So the next point, there are many supply chain impacts. There are many supply chain issues. Some of these were expected, and some of these were not expected. Some of these are a bit of a surprise in terms of what the agreement holds itself. So in terms of the impacts that you can see, I suppose, in the first 5 weeks of this new trading arrangement, the first thing is logistical delays. All shipments to, from, and through the UK have primarily been delayed in January. That was not a surprise. There was always going to be checks and controls. The UK became a third country from the EU. There was a new border posting with border controls that are required to govern and protect both the EU and the UK. So those logistical delays were inevitable. There's a volume of paperwork and customs obligations which are required. So hopefully in time the logistical delays will reduce. There's no guarantee in the short term, because January 2021 is 50% lower transport to, from, and through the UK than January 2020, obviously due to COVID lockdowns, obviously due to Brexit and stockpiling. So while there has been logistical delays, they're probably going to continue, particularly as we open up the economies on both sides of the border, and the impacts that may have. So hopefully in time, though, the paperwork will improve, the regulators, customs, the procedures, the checks, controls can get a bit more automated or semi-automated, and that may help. But the idea of next day delivery or 24-hour shipments to or from the UK cannot be guaranteed in future. I won't say it's completely a thing of the past, but certainly some items, and particularly pallets and groupage trailers, are very slow at the moment. It's easier to get a container through Dublin Port than it is to get a pallet through at the moment. But again, hopefully, like I said, that'll ease in time. But just bear in mind, particularly with your customers, what expectations you can set. The primary reason for logistical delays is the customs administration. So the import, the export declarations, the SPS controls, there's a range of customs procedures and documentation required depending on what's being moved. And it mightn't be particularly your business, it mightn't be particularly your parcel or your pallet is an issue, but there's a range of other documentation that's required for other areas. The high risk areas around the movement of live animals, around our food of our animal origin, the controls and the SPS checks, the registration with traces. And this whole new engagement with traders in the UK has created a lot of friction, has created a lot of difficulty, has created a severe big demand for obviously for expertise and customs clearance. So that customs administration is here to stay. Dealing with GB in future is going to require customs declarations to and from, as long as the trade agreement is in place. So you need to understand that you need to have a resource for that, be it internally, externally, or online, depending on how you want to handle those customs procedures. So that's something that you need to get aware of and informed about. Unfortunately, cash flow is going to be impacted. There is potentially tariffs. So while the trade agreement announced that there was 0 tariffs and 0 quotas, that was the headline from Boris Johnson. In fact, the 0 tariffs would only apply when the rules of origin are adhered to. So for items that are wholly produced in the UK, there's no tariffs coming into Ireland. For items produced wholly in Ireland that go to the UK, there's no tariffs. However, modern global supply chains, it's not always that simple. There's items coming from different jurisdictions across the globe, across the EU, into the UK, and there may be tariffs applied. So duties are applied, and those duties and tariffs can be checked. And obviously, that's a pass-on cost. You cannot do anything about that. VAT treatment has changed. VAT now is being imposed and it needs to be regulated upon and reporting with HMRC and revenue here in Ireland. VAT treatment in terms of registering for postponed VAT accounting has been undertaken by some, not all businesses. But again, there's a cash flow impact there, which wouldn't have been there in the past. And you can see inflation coming in as well. We spoke to a lot of freight companies and customs agents and even traders as well. And a lot of people are holding their prices from 2020 levels into January 2021. But it's really a case of monitoring and seeing what's going to happen. You can expect price increases. You can expect logistical delays to continue. French freight companies into the UK in the past month have increased their freight cost by 30 to 40%. You can see that knock-on happening as well in particular jurisdictions, particular industries and sectors. So just be conscious of the pricing there. If you are forward pricing, if you're putting together quotations or proposals for your customers at the moment, be conscious that the pricing that you're getting from the UK may increase in the shorter term. Big challenge which hasn't hit the headlines as much is diverging and emerging standards. So the UK, as a third country to the EU, has taken back control as they wanted to do. They have left and they can now set their own rules of trade. They can now set their own standards of products, of movement of chemicals, possibly of data protection, which we will see as an issue possibly in time. So they have moved out of the EU legislative arena. They've moved out of the EU trading bloc, and now they can set their own accreditations and standards. I'll come into a few examples of that in a while, but those diverging standards will cause potential bottlenecks. They will actually stop a product coming onto the island of Ireland or vice versa, as opposed to the customs items, which you just have to pay more for, you to get the paperwork right, which will only delay an issue. But if you don't have the legislation right, products cannot be placed safely on the UK or the EU market, depending on the jurisdiction that you're looking at. And again, I'll come back to that point in a second. The indirect supply chain risks is something that we're noticing quite a bit of. Again, this wasn't a big surprise. You might be buying from a company locally in Kerry or on the island of Ireland. You might be buying from Belfast. And because of the Northern Irish Protocol in Northern Ireland, you may have perceived that there's no difficulty buying from Northern Ireland or vice versa. However, Northern Irish companies have to go through more paperwork and owners. And the issues here is it mightn't be your primary supplier. It might be your second level or third level supplier. Getting goods from France into the UK that might be going to Northern Ireland down to Kerry is creating a lot of difficulties, a lot of paperwork, a lot of administration, and a lot of suppliers on that journey may have not their act in order, as we've seen in the first 6 weeks of 2021, where a lot of GB suppliers have said they're no longer supplying the island of Ireland. So indirectly, there's supply chain risks and bottlenecks, and you need to go back to your supply chain. You need to understand what that looks like. And even if you're selling If you're using an agent or a distributor or a freight forwarder or a customs agent, if you're selling to GB, you need to understand forward in your supply chain if your partners are prepared for Brexit, if they understand how to deal with the trade and cooperation agreement, and if they have alternatives in place if there's difficulties that may arise. One of the last items that we'll notice, and it's probably not an issue as of yet because of the COVID lockdowns in Western Europe, is the visas and recognition and qualification. So this is not an issue for Irish or UK citizens, but for non-UK citizens working in the UK, they will now need a visa. They will now need to adhere to the EU settlement program to work in the UK. They will need a visa, working visa, possibly to work in the EU, particularly if they're visiting for a longer term. There's also a divergence around qualifications, qualifications of individuals. This has become noticeable with doctors and nurses and engineers in some areas, where there hasn't been alignment of the qualifications. So the EU and the UK have not recognised their qualifications. Now, Engineering Ireland and Chartered Accountants in Ireland and the UK have come out and said they've already mutually recognised the qualifications. Other sectors have not. So just be conscious in future during 2021, if you have a service provider, if you have an individual coming from the UK over to you to provide a service, just to make sure that they're aware of what their qualifications are and what their visa entitlements are, and if they can safely work in the EU. What all this does is, while this bringing all these together, effectively we're now living with a hard Brexit. When we started doing these workshops with clients 4 years ago, there was talks of a soft Brexit and a hard Brexit, and now we're living with a hard Brexit. So because of the rushed agreement, because of the difficulties, because of the UK's agenda to move away from EU standards, because of the implementation of the customs procedures, this is a hard Brexit, and that's not to be forgotten. What that outlines for businesses, it does quite a bit of uncertainty. In the first 6 weeks, we've seen that already. The agreement itself is quite complex. There's going to be lots of busy trade solicitors in the years to come, negotiating with the EU and the UK governments on different easements and different regulations. And there's difficulties, and supply chain partners still don't understand the likes of what's happening with GDPR, which is unknown yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the agreement, and that is not helpful for businesses in terms of making decisions and forecasts. Cost increases are inevitable. Most of the items listed on 1 to 6 on the left-hand side may lead to cost increases. There's going to be pass-on charges, and you need to be aware of that. You need to understand that if you are in a particular contract with a pricing range at the moment, or if you're putting together quotations or proposal for future, maintain your margin, maintain your profits, and make sure that you're aware of the cost increases may follow. And the unsustainability of supply. So we've already seen hundreds of EU companies saying they're not going to supply GB. We've seen hundreds of UK companies saying they're not going to supply goods on the island of Ireland, including Northern Ireland, because of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and Northern Irish Protocol. So not getting a product is an issue. That has been partially masked at the moment because a lot of companies were stockpiling in November and December because of this. Also, due to COVID restrictions, some industries are obviously closed at the moment. So the unsustainability of supply is a big issue. So you need to understand from your suppliers how they can guarantee you to get product in future. I'll explain some of these issues a bit more. I suppose the ones on the previous slide. The first one I start with is customs. Customs is quite complex. We could spend a full day and the local enterprise office of a full day training at the end of the month or later this month on customs clearance. But just to give you a brief overview and some advice from our point of view, the customs obligations that you have buying and supplying to GB are called Incoterms. They're defined by international commercial trading terms. These are not new. If you're buying outside the EU for many years, you'll be aware of these. This is a summary slide, and there's lots of information available online and from others. But effectively, when you're buying, there's 11 different types of Incoterms that can be used, starting with DDP down here, which you're probably most used to, going up to X works here, which I'll come back to in a sec. But DDP, delivery duty paid, is typically what the arrangement was with GB suppliers in the past and Irish companies supplying to UK, where you would look after, if you were selling to GB, you looked after the freight, the logistics, the insurances. There was no duties and there was no VAT obligations per se, but the insurances and the logistics had to be looked after, and delivering the good to Manchester or Leeds or wherever the case may be was on the responsibility of the business in Kerry. So conversely, I suppose with GB suppliers and UK suppliers, they would deliver to us GDP in the past, and they would look after all logistics and transport and get the product to us. However, the obligations with a third country change in regards to GDP. So they do have to now account for the customs declaration. They do have to complete the VAT returns. They do need to look after the duties and customs if there are, and if they're not, they need to justify why there are no customs and duties. So the terms of DDP put a lot more responsibility on the seller, and that's something that needs to be aware of. And that's, and whether you're a seller or your supplier is selling to you, you need to understand what the Inco terms they're proposing and whether they fully understand DDP. And this has been an issue we've seen in the last 5 weeks. A lot of UK companies have realized that they cannot supply DDP to Ireland. They haven't registered revenue. They cannot process the VAT treatment, and they're not aware of the rules of origin piece, etc. So DDP is now being changed, and there's some other terms that are coming into place here, where there's more responsibility on the buyer in the destination country in terms of dealing with revenue and customs locally. On the X-Works, I'll explain it on the other side of the coin. In terms of X-Works, is the buyer has full responsibility for absolutely all tasks within the supply chain. We have seen many companies in Kerry who are now buying X-Works from the UK. So they have a good haulage company, they have a good customs clearance agent, and they're looking after all the paperwork and freight and everything. So the supplier in London or Edinburgh is putting the item into their warehouse, and it's being collected by the Kerry company through a trade or freight company and customs clearance agent. And that way you have full control over all the paperwork, the VAT, the duties, etc. What we would recommend to companies is that if you can supply the GB, do it on a DDP or an X-Works basis, whichever your terms are. Don't be getting caught in the middle here in other areas if possible. And also from a buying point of view, if you can buy everything and control everything X-Works, if you have a good agent, or if you don't, if you just want the simplicity of everything being DDP, try and negotiate it one or the other. Where it gets confusing in the middle is when you have different actors, different people, different responsibilities. We've seen supply chains in the middle here where you have 2 different freight companies, you've got 2 different customs clearance agents, you obviously have a buyer and a supplier. So you've got 6 different companies trying to manage all this in the middle, and that's where the mess is, and that's where mistakes have been made, and that's where we've seen customs declarations and people have been paying duties and VAT incorrectly at the moment because not understanding the difference under Inco terms. And even customs agents, some of them have completed the paperwork incorrectly, and confusion has arisen. So my key point around Inco terms and customs duty is to focus on one or the other if you can negotiate that, and then obviously get a good agent to manage it through if needs be. So I'll just clear those marks there before we go on to the next slide and close this part out. The divergence and emergence of standards is something, again, that hasn't hit the headlines, as I said. A good example of this, which we're all probably aware of, is CE marking. So to put a product on the EU market, it has to apply to general product safety directives, as you can imagine. So that's the CE mark, as we're all familiar with. You look around the office, you look around the house, your laptops, your plugs, everything that around you, toys and even umbrellas and stuff, they all have a CE mark if they're safe to produce on the EU market. How you get a CE mark, I suppose the technicalities around it is that a notified body, which needs to be based in the EU, needs to do a conformity assessment test, and then you get your CE marking. However, a lot of UK companies would have used UK entities, notified bodies in the past, and they would have a UK notified body producing a CE mark. Those UK notified bodies can no longer produce a CE mark in the UK. Some of them have set up offices in the EU, others have not. So the issue there is UK manufacturers putting products on the EU need to adhere to EU standards. They need to use an EU notified body. And as we're aware already, some of them have not done that. So there's products that can't be placed safely on the EU market. To make it a bit more complex, the UK have introduced their own regulation around this. It's called the UK CA mark. If you were to pull out the 2 documents, they're identical. So the UK CA has cloned and copied the CE jurisdiction. However, if you're putting goods for sale in the UK, that includes, should say GB here, that excludes Northern Ireland. It's England, Wales, and Scotland. You need a UK CA mark in future. Now they give a 12-month easement here. So in 2021, they're recognizing the CE and the UK CA in the UK, and this is where the confusion arises, because other jurisdictions, or sorry, other regulations and standards, there is no easement. The CE marking also will apply further in the UK for medical devices, but that's going to be into 2023. However, the challenge is for businesses selling in from Kerry to UK, you need to now register your goods with UKCA as well, and there's obviously a cost component of that. Technically, when it comes down to it, the products, if they're adhered to one standard, they'll get adhered to other quite quickly, but it's just a cost and administration of managing dual registrations, and that's both from a GB supplier to the EU and also from a EU suppliers if you're selling to both the UK and the EU with the same products. To make things slightly more complex, Northern Ireland has introduced to the UK government a UK NI mark. A UK NI mark designates that the product is suitable for the Northern Irish and the UK markets, and it's manufactured in Northern Ireland. However, that's not going to be recognised in ROI or the EU. So while you might be talking to your manufacturer in the UK and they're saying, yes, we're going to get the UKCA, we'll have our registrations up to date, or we'll get the UK NI mark in Derry or Belfast, that's not much good to you, because those marks are not going to be recognised in the EU. The EU obviously requires CE marking, so make sure your supply chain partners know that, and obviously your customers as well. The next thing to comment upon here in terms of all these issues that have arisen, or all these potential bottlenecks that which may happen or may occur in the future, what we would say to businesses is relax at this stage and ask yourself whether these issues are short term, or are they going to be permanent challenges? So there has been teething problems, there has been issues that are going to be overcome, there has been difficulties with some supply chain partners, but they'll get their act in gear. Or is the question, are these going to be permanent challenges? Are these going to be structural changes to the trading relationship with GB, which you need to work around in future? So that's the first thing to ask, is ensure when you are making business decisions around Brexit for the next 12 months, is it just a teething problem, or is this going to be a permanent change? The next thing to ask, is there going to be further changes? Now, I don't even have a crystal ball around this to know what changes might happen with the future trading cooperation agreement. However, the fact that there was a number of easements already, particularly in Northern Ireland for VAT treatment to the trading cooperation agreement, I suspect that there is ongoing discussions and negotiation between London and Brussels around the biggest issues, the biggest bottlenecks. And that is going to be an ongoing challenge for businesses, really, is to keep up to date on what changes might occur in this future trade and cooperation agreement. Other free trade agreements globally would always have changes and over time. So how to monitor those and how to make sure how it affects your business and your industry is important to keep an eye on. The next thing is to look at is, can you make supply changes yourself? So because of the challenges that we've outlined in the previous number of slides, what changes can you make to your operation? What changes can you make to your supply arrangement, be that from a customer point of view or supply point of view? And I have a full slide dedicated on this later, so I won't dwell on it too much at this stage. The next thing to look at is what opportunities. So what benefits do your current supply chain create? Are you getting your raw materials from the continent in terms of the EU that your competitors are getting from the UK, that you might know have an advantage? Are you competing with Great British supplier, or sorry, competitors here in Ireland? Do they now have a price increase? Are they now have different restrictions and controls? Are you supplying to the UK in an advantageous position over your competitors in terms of you getting raw materials from the EU, whereas in terms of the raw materials that they may be getting from different third parties globally might have a duty imposed? So you need to understand what opportunities, and there's a range of opportunities that will emerge like any crisis. And there's a range of new expertise required. So you need to look at the opportunities that Brexit may present as well, and not just look at it as the challenges. And one of the last things here is to understand what role your current or future suppliers will play. So a key question that we're asking us at the moment, a lot of businesses are asking us in terms of your current suppliers may not be fully functioning in terms of the new trade and cooperation agreement. Some GB suppliers have particular issues. Obviously, we're with lockdowns as well and COVID restrictions and etc. doesn't help businesses operate fully. Or else do you need to look at future suppliers? So I'm not going to sing the song, but 40 years ago, The Clash had a song in terms of should I stay or should I go? And that is a key question that a lot of businesses are asking at the moment. Should we stay with our current GB suppliers, or should we look at alternatives? And a lot of proactive companies are looking at alternatives in a compliant jurisdiction where you don't have to deal with the hassle and the bottleneck and logistical delays and the customs administration. So there's a lot of work involved in that. And again, we'll look into some of that issues slightly over the next couple of slides. Before you think of moving suppliers or moving customers or changing anything, you need to understand, like I said, previously, whether these are issues or teething problems or long-term changes. One of the key questions to ask us is asking your customers, suppliers, is how has the trade and cooperation agreement impacted them already? So if they're in GB, is there shipments coming in from the EU that have been delayed? Is there customs and duties being imposed if the items are even coming from a third country? What does the supply chain from UK to ROI look like? And what's it going to look like? So as I mentioned, January 2021, logistics to from through the UK are 50% of the level they were in 2020, January 2020. So when that gets back up to normal, what's that going to look like? What's the impact going to be? And you need to understand that before you make any longer term buying or supplying decisions. You need to understand in terms of what you're dealing with in future. You need to understand the Incoterms. We mentioned this already. We were dealing with up between 40 and 50 different suppliers from the UK in December for one client. We got all their Incoterms outlined and defined and nailed down, and we were comfortable that we felt that we knew what was happening around Incoterms. About 20% of those suppliers have changed Incoterms since because they didn't understand what their Incoterms were. And obviously, in fairness to them, a lot of businesses were surprised with some of the issues around the trade and cooperation agreement as well that was announced on Christmas Eve. So the obligations and responsibilities around international movement of goods are difficult and challenging. So you need to understand from your customer point of view and your suppliers what Incoterms are going to work for everyone and what are they going to be fixed for 2021? Are they going to change? And these can be negotiated, and it's down to your own level of purchasing power, your supplier power, where you are in the supply chain, what the Incoterms are, and what's the best way to deal with it. And speaking to a good customs agent, I know a lot of customs agents are recommending moving from DDP from a seller point of view here, or sorry, from a buyer point of view here in Ireland, even to move with DAP. So it's controlling some of the elements locally, some of the engagements with revenue might be easier to do from an Irish company's perspective than a UK company. So considering those is wise. You need to ask as well, what changes to supply or pricing can you expect in 2021? So we mentioned about pricing earlier and the cost increases that are brought around because of Brexit. This may or may not impact your customers. What you need to understand is what's going to happen in future. What are the price impacts? You also need to understand the supply changes. What are the guarantees that you can get around receiving products? Again, this may change during the year. A lot of companies, like I mentioned, have been stockpiling, and they may be masking over the issues that might arise from a supply chain point of view. So you need to understand what's it going to look like in 2021. You need to understand and ask your suppliers and even educate your customers around rules of origin. If there is going to be customs and duties, what they are. If there's any changes to regulations or any of the regulations that have changed and accreditations and standards or qualifications, what's the impact going to be? And again, around logistics, if there's any particular delays that are expected or forecast. There's a range of questions, and if you want, there's a survey that we use with our existing customers. If you want to email myself or Catherine afterwards, we can send you a copy of that survey of a range of questions that you should be asking your supply chain partners in terms of how you'll work together in 2021. I mentioned earlier about alternative supply chain aspects. So if you have difficulties in your supply chain, you can look at changing Incoterms, you can look at changing responsibilities. If you've got a good freight company, if you've got a good customs agent, you'll get a lot of advice on this. And controlling that responsibility and relationship with your suppliers or customers is worthwhile. It's worthwhile negotiating and getting comfortable with it. It's not for the faint-hearted in terms of changing and negotiating Incoterms. You need to understand what that means in terms of your own responsibilities. But some businesses have a very good agent, as we've seen lately, and they're looking at negotiating and changing their Incoterms and taking more of responsibility, and then obviously you take full control as well. You can, from a logistics point of view, you can look at the routes that have been used. You can obviously, there's been a lot of companies bypassing the UK, GB entirely, in terms of going direct to the continent. Companies we've seen are increasing their ordering and storage because the same paperwork is required to bring one pallet in as it's bringing 5 pallets in from GB, and obviously that goes vice versa too. So can you increase the consignments? Can you reduce the paperwork? Can you increase the consignments? And can you get products in your warehouse as opposed to going looking for them? So that's something to consider. A more drastic option, it's something that we've seen 1 or 2 clients doing, particularly in the steel and fabrication sectors at the moment, because there is issues around steel from GB. It's changing the raw materials and changing the inputs. So changing the goods that are going into your processes. It's not an option for many businesses, but if it is, look at that, see what alternatives are out there. It does require some re-engineering and a entirely different strategy. We have seen a lot of movement around freight and customs agents, like everything, like in a crisis, the cream will rise to the crop, and the best freight companies and the best customs agents will get bigger and stronger. But there has been incorrect declarations. There has been no lead-in period or no phasing or implementation period to the agreement, and there has been customs agents. We've seen quite a few, I suppose, across the continent, goods coming into the UK and into Ireland afterwards, where they haven't understood the likes of the Northern Irish Protocol, where they haven't treated postponed VAT accounting, where they haven't had the rules of origin done correctly, and there has been charges by customs and HMRC incorrectly because of the customs agents' errors. So it might be required that your supply chain partners are the weakest links. You might need to upgrade those. A more drastic option, again, I suppose, as mentioned earlier, is changing production processes, even looking where the goods are being produced. We have one or two businesses who are now considering relocation production into the UK because of the rules of origin that needs to be processed, and requirements around that to get a zero tariff. So you need to consider that, how that looks like from a supply chain perspective. You can, obviously, your own internal staff, you need to upskill and probably change roles, make sure that the right people are dealing with the right issues and the biggest problems and opportunities around Brexit. You need to consider that. And finally, you consider changing sources of supply. So it may be wise to look at alternative sources of supply. We have a number of GB businesses who have said they're not looking for alternative sources of supply. So a lot of the work we're doing at Arvo in the last 6 weeks is looking for alternative suppliers across the continent that can supply as an alternative. And unfortunately, that has been the nature of the supply chain disruption that has taken place. In terms of continuing to trade with GB, the requirements are, and you probably know this already, but you do need your EOI number, you need your EOI number, you need your supply chain partner in the UK, you need your freight forwarder's EOI number, you probably need your customs agent's EOI number. The declarations require EOI numbers to move any good across any of the borders. So making sure you have yours and your customers and suppliers. And again, businesses, even up to last week, haven't done that. We have some companies that are now looking for the EOI number. It's very easy to get. Go onto Revenue's online system and register for excise and international duties and taxes, and you get an EOI number. The commodity codes are important. You can check the TARC database. All the declarations of moving goods require a commodity code, and the right commodity code is vital. If you have the wrong commodity code, you may have duties imposed. If the right commodity code will save you money if it's done correctly. And working with your customs agents to get those right is important. I mentioned the INCO terms. I'm not going to dwell on it too much here, but understanding what the INCO terms are and if they're going to change is important as well. Having your VAT number, all VAT registered businesses will have it. If you're registered, you can postpone VAT accounting. And if you have postponed VAT accounting, that needs to be implied on your customs declaration to make use of it. And then the VAT is treated in your quarterly return, as an example, or whenever your VAT returns are done. And registering for that VAT or registering the post-post VAT accounting is important. You can also register for VAT with the UK in terms of HMRC if you're selling a significant amount or selling any amount. Really, it's probably recommended from HMRC's point of view. They want everyone to register for VAT in the UK. You can also register for deferred VAT accounting. Now, registering for VAT in the UK is very slow at the moment. I know it's taken 6 to 8 weeks, where it would normally take 2 or 3 weeks last year. Commercial invoices are vital. So all the detail of the consignee, the receiver, all the details around the shipment, the weight, the insurances, the taxes, the duties, the customs declarations, the EOI numbers. There's a lot of more detail in an international commercial invoice or trading with a third country. And there's a lot of information available online, and making sure your accounting system has that in place. You need to obviously outline who's managing your customs. If you're trading goods with the UK, there is customs declarations. You need a broker, or you can do it in the house, or you can use an online system like Declaron. Whatever the case may be, understanding the basics of customs yourself is important, but then having the right solution in place to make sure that those paperwork is completed correctly. And finally, around licensing and certifications, and that would include qualifications, understanding what issues might arise, what changes are happening around importing and exporting from third countries. I mentioned CE marking obviously quite a bit. The EU REACH or UK REACH is to do with the movement of chemicals and registrations. And again, that's going to be very, very prevalent. Labeling, packaging, classifying goods. GDPR is in here, and that hasn't been ironed out yet. At the moment, we're in a transition period or a waiting period around GDPR. So for software companies or service providers, At the moment, the EU GDPR is still being recognised in the UK, and that's a decision is still being made on the UK's adequacy to EU standards, and this is an ongoing negotiation. A decision is due in April or June. They have two deadlines in there at the moment. You can probably, it'll be June probably, whether there's going to be an adequacy agreement for the UK. If there is not, there's going to be difficulties processing EU citizens' data in the UK and UK citizens' data in the EU. So from a software and services point of view, you need to be conscious of that. If you have a software company that's servicing you from the UK, they need to be conscious of that. So just monitor data protection in the months ahead. Now, we'll wrap up with some resources before we open the Q&A. The local enterprise offices have lots of information available online. They also have mentoring and one-to-one support for the likes of ourselves. Actually, if you wanted to work with myself or Catherine over a longer conversation than this brief Q&A that's going to follow, if you want to work us with you on some of the Brexit issues that are specific to your business, there's free mentoring available on the local enterprise office in Kerry if you go /training and events. And also, in the 16th of next week, the 16th of February, there's a full day customs webinar. If you're new to customs clearance and if you've quite a bit of trade with the UK, it's best that you do understand the principles of it. This training will migrate you towards doing the work yourself, if that's the case may be, or if you just need an understanding of it, that training will help you give an overview in terms of what's required. It is responsibility of the individual that's the importer of record, or if you're an exporting role, you need to have, there is obligations around that. And there's lots of easements and there's lots of regulations and there's lots of changes that will happen to customs clearance, and having a sophisticated customs clearance agent will save people a lot of money. But obviously starting with the webinar next week with the enterprise office is a good place to go. I mentioned a lot of information earlier, and there's a range of useful links. These slides will be shared afterwards, so you can check out these links. But Revenue has a load of information on trading with the UK and what the obligations are. There's videos, there's online content. It's very useful. The rules of origin assessment has been a big issue for a lot of businesses, but the European Commission have a system called ROSA. So it's the rules of origin self-assessment test. You can put in your customs or your customs commodity codes, your commodity codes. You can include your commodity codes, you include your buying and supplying partners, and you can get a decision made on whether the rules of origin are applied, or if there's any duties or tariffs to be applied. So that's a very useful link if you're concerned with rules of origin. The HSA and the National Standard Association have a lot of information on the regulations and standards in the REACH and the CE marking and how those changes will occur and impact different businesses and sectors. Enterprise Ireland have a Brexit readiness checker. Now, this is a very useful tool preparing for Brexit, but now that we're living with Brexit, it gives a holistic view on the impacts that may not occur. So it's just worth doing a diagnostic if you have 15 minutes to assess your own business in regards to Brexit and where you are. The UK government, in fairness, have had a lot of very good information online portal and a webinar, gov.uk/transition. There's a lot of information available there for Kerry businesses selling to the UK in terms of your obligations around VAT, as an example. Arvo ourselves, we have a book there, an ebook online. This is more to do with supplier management around Brexit and how to identify the most at-risk suppliers and how to work with the suppliers there afterwards. So that ebook is there as well. There's a lot of useful phone numbers. This is probably difficult to see now on screen, but customs revenue commissioners are open 24 hours. If you have any queries on import-export declarations, you can contact Revenue 24 hours a day. Department of Agriculture, with all the traces and SBS checks and controls, are open 24 hours a day, and there's emails and phones there. And there's a range of other information and phone numbers and direct contact centers and call centers available on gov.ie/Brexit. So just make sure, just realize that you're not alone. There's a lot of information available, both online links and telephone numbers. I better summarize this quite quickly and give time for Q&A. So the first thing I would suggest is to monitor the ongoing Brexit changes while we have the trade and cooperation agreement now. It's not set in stone. It will evolve, and your supply chain will evolve as different partners react. Good customer relationship management, understanding what your customer demands are. What are they expecting from Incoterms? What are they expecting from regulation? What's their sensitivity to price increases? Supplier relationship management, we did a lot of work on that. We did a lot of coverage on that earlier in terms of managing your current suppliers, understanding their current risks, working with them, or looking at new alternative suppliers. And again, Arvo are doing that work on a daily basis. And that includes this point here, strategic sourcing of new suppliers. So based on the current fallout and Brexit risks, there's a range of strategies in terms of finding new suppliers, and there's supports available for that. And finally, I suppose, keeping up to date as you are in the webinar today, looking at the supports available from the local enterprise office, upskilling, getting updates and the knowledge and expertise from the right sources, from the government sources. Obviously, the media is helpful, but some of the stuff is glorified for the media purposes. But so getting accurate information from good sources is very worthwhile. So at that stage, I'll wrap up this piece of the presentation. We'll go to Q&A. I'll stop the recording